Kia ora koutou. Welcome to the Kerridge and Partners webinar series. My name is Renisa Peterson and I am a consultant with the firm. As part of our vision to transform the leadership landscape, we have been working on a series of leadership events, including this webinar series. Thank you to everyone who has been attending our webinar series over the last few months. They have certainly picked up momentum and sparked conversations online, spanning topics on leadership in crisis, talent development, CEO succession, and more recently, a series of leadership conversations with leaders who bring a global and local lens. We wanted to pivot slightly on conversations with executives to instead bring outside-in thinking. We are delighted you are joining us today as we will be speaking to two of New Zealand's world champion rowers, Kelsey Bevan and Grace Prendergast, regarding lessons learned from high-performance sport and resilience after setbacks, and explore how these insights can be translated into a business context. Kelsey is from Counties Manukau and first rowed for New Zealand in 2009. Kelsey went through the age groups and in 2012 won gold in the women's under-23 pair. In 2014, she won her first elite world title in the women's 4 and set a world's best time. Following this, she was a member of the elite women's 8 that qualified for Rio. It was the first time a New Zealand women's 8 had qualified for the Olympic Games, and she came fourth at the Games. Since then, Kelsey has been a member of the women's 8, and in 2019, won gold at the World Championship, which was the first time New Zealand has ever won this event. Grace grew up in Christchurch and made the junior New Zealand rowing team in 2010 and won gold in the women's 4. After that, Grace spent a few years rowing for age group teams and in 2014 won gold in the women's under-23 pair and elites women's 4. She was also a part of the women's 8 that qualified and raced in the Rio Olympics. After the Olympics, Grace had been in the women's pair and won gold in 2017, silver in 2018, and in 2019 she doubled up and raced both the pair and 8 and won gold in both, which was the first time someone has won gold in 2 events. For context on who is with us online as part of this community, we have over 50 people attending, a cohort of senior executives from a diverse range of sectors and industries. Haere mai. Some housekeeping matters to address. Firstly, you have all joined this webinar on mute, and please rest assured you're not on video, so you can sit back and relax. You will remain on mute by default, so no need to stress about background noise either. We will also be uploading a recording of this webinar to our website, so no need to worry about writing too many notes. Secondly, we encourage you to participate by asking questions throughout the session. On the bottom of your screen, there is a Zoom chat function button, Q&A. Please type in your questions and we will address the most popular ones during our panel session, which I will expand on shortly. Please can we request that you send your questions using the Q&A function instead of the Zoom chat function. Thirdly, we wanted to share the structure of our webinar today so you know what to expect. Following this introduction, Grace and Kelsey will participate in a Q&A dialogue with Chiwe Kwan. Chiwe leads our Leadership Solutions practice. He has over 30 years experience in senior roles across government, corporate HR, and leadership consulting firms. Chiwe has worked with senior leaders across the Asia Pacific and continues to be a keen student of leadership. Afterward, we will have a dialogue with Vicki Mclean. Vicki is a partner and she brings over 30 years experience in executive search. She's been with the Kerridge team since 2006 and seen numerous leaders and their styles, working on a plethora of CEO, C-suite, GM level, and board appointments. She also serves on a number of not-for-profit boards. A native of Scotland, she brings warmth and wit to her work and is renowned for being direct and transparent in her approach. Vicki is also very knowledgeable about the sport of rowing, an avid enthusiast and commentator, as well as having family connections to the sport as her son Oliver Maclean has represented New Zealand on a number of occasions. Following these panel discussions, we will be facilitating questions from all of you, the participants. So without further ado, let's launch right in. Please welcome Grace and Kelsey.
Grace, Kelsey, once again, a very good morning, and thank you so much for taking time out from your busy training schedules to join us. I understand you guys just came off a training session this morning down at Lake Carapiro.
Yes, we did. It's not very nice weather here, so we didn't manage to go outside, but yeah, we urged this morning.
Oh, we're absolutely delighted that you could join us this morning. Well, what can I say? World champions, world record holders, Olympians. Really keen to have a chat with you in terms of how you keep on top of your sport, training, mental resilience, and so on. But first off, I'm really interested in how you guys dealt with the lockdown. 3 months, you couldn't train the way you've always been used to training. How do you keep yourself motivated, especially coming off the back of lockdown? The Olympics have been postponed. Tell us what you did during lockdown.
Yeah, it was really tough. Like, I think something that I've always liked about rowing is the fact that you just have to turn up and you do all your sessions together. Like, it's such a dedicated team sport, so you don't really need to find that motivation to be by yourself and do it. And obviously lockdown was the complete opposite of that. Like, you didn't have the team around you to sort of get there and motivate you. But surprisingly enough, it wasn't too bad. Like, Kelsey and I live together, so it was nice just to have someone else there to sort of train with, and we just kind of tried to keep our routines the same. And
yeah, to be honest, it was quite easy. Well, Grace was relying on me to get up and do the sessions, and I was relying on Grace to get up and do the sessions. So yeah, it was easy to get up, get on with the day. Our trainings were very similar to what we were doing back at Carapiro, except they were on a rowing machine. But yeah, motivation was easy for us, which maybe not.
Well, that's all great, right? Because you were together, you trained together. But what about your other peers who were part of the eight? I mean, how do you know that everyone's pulling their own weight and training on their own? It must have been tough.
We communicated pretty much daily after each session. If it was a tough session, one of the girls we've got the Snapchat app, and we would Snapchat each other after every session and be like, how was that? Like, how did you guys find that? And I felt like that was quite good, just to communicate and see how everyone was tracking. But the trust was there. We knew everyone was doing the training.
Yeah, and I think like everyone has good and bad days. Like, it's never going to be easy every day. But I think with us, like, we've got such a clear focus and goal, which is the Olympics. Whenever it happens, that was enough to sort of drive our motivation during lockdown. But yeah, I think it's just sort of like getting through the bad days and then enjoying the good days as well.
Let's come back to that later, because you spoke about clear focus, goals, and trusting your other teammates to do the same. Because if I think about the work we do in the corporate sector, I mean, a lot of these would translate to working from home, and how do you know people are pulling their own weight, right? But let's come back to the question I threw you at the beginning. Now, how do you deal with this? You've been training to peak for the Olympics, right? And now it's been pushed back for a year. Hopefully, it happens next year. How do you deal with this sort of mental topsy-turvy thingy?
We're quite good at seeing the positives. Like, the way our group's kind of seen it as is another free year. So we've got another year to get fitter, stronger, and better than we would have been if we were racing this year at the Olympics. So yeah, I just kind of see it that way. We've got some free day, free full year.
Yeah, and it's definitely tough. Like, I think we often talk about like controlling the things you can control and not forgetting about the uncontrollables. And I guess the date of the Olympics was something that we thought we were in control of. Like, we knew when our final was going to be, and we knew all of that. And that's what we were working towards. So obviously when that was taken away and it's just a lot of unknown, that was really tough. But I think like we all just let ourselves sort of like grieve over that, if you could call it that, for a little bit. And then just knew we had to get on. We've still got the same goal, but it's just a year later now.
Okay, that's great. Let's move on and talk a bit more generically about, how did both of you stay on top of your game? I mean, it's tough as it is, but how do you really stay on top of what you do?
Yeah, it is tough. Like, I think with anything, like any job or like what we do, you definitely have your ups and downs. But I think like we've got a really strong team and a strong culture within our team, so you can sort of fall back onto that a lot. And like that takes a lot of work for us. And I think like we've built that base so well that it's sort of like you can start thinking about the little like 1%ers on top of that. and yeah, for us, like probably our culture is one of the things that I think sets us apart. Like looking at past crews I've been in that haven't gone as well, like I think that's often what lets us down, which we've learned a lot from and sort of have built on that now.
It took us a while, like 4 years ago, our culture was not what it is now, but it took those 4 years and some of those mistakes that we did make back then to be able to get to the place that we are now. So yeah.
Can you speak a bit more about the culture? Because again, if I think about translating the whole concept of your team culture to what we do in the corporate sector, I'm really keen, how as you mentioned, the culture shifted 4 years ago to now. I mean, how would you describe the team culture today compared to 4 years ago?
I think like 4 years ago, we probably weren't as willing to sort of have those really awkward conversations and talk about the tough things, and would rather like sweep them under the rug rather than sort of put yourself out there and be a bit vulnerable to maybe like call someone out or like have a tough conversation. Whereas now I think we've sort of tried to create the environment that you can say whatever you want, because everyone knows you're only trying to get the best for the boat, and
no one's trying to be mean to you or anything, like especially girls, like we really struggled with feedback. And so now we've just tried to develop a team where if someone has something to say to me, I'm going to take that on board and I'm going to try my hardest to work on that. And it's not coming from a bad place. We're just trying to make each other go better. So we've had some
what led to that change in culture? Was it an incident, an individual, a leader, or what happened?
We had some coaching changes. We've got a new, when did Gary come on board? In 2000 and...
He started coaching us after Rio.
And he really drives like a culture that's like exactly what we're explaining. And the same with him, you're able to have conversations with him that you probably couldn't with past coaches. So it really just, he drove that change, but then he put it on to us, and we had meetings where we would discuss what we wanted our vision and our culture to look like, and it took us to really end up driving it.
And I think that all sort of stemmed from like our past Olympic experience. Like we were both in Rio in the women's 8, and like I thought we had a good culture, but then when we got into the Olympics and like the pressure started to come on, like you could see all the cracks in it. And I think we hadn't built a strong enough culture there that like we sort of just all separated and sort of went into our own shells, because we hadn't done the work before our pinnacle event. So I think we all learned a lot from Rio, and then sort of knew that you've really got to lay the foundation. Otherwise, when pressure comes on, it's not going to withstand the sort of external forces.
We almost needed Rio though to know that we had those cracks. Like if we didn't experience that, we would have kept that culture going up until Tokyo. But it was really important for us to experience those cracks under pressure and learn from them.
I'm really curious, what keeps you as individuals motivated? What's driving you?
Like, you want to say an Olympic gold medal, but to me, it's like all the girls that I'm training with every day, they continuously drive me to get better. They put their bodies on the line, they've made sacrifices. And so, it's pretty much our entire girls squad that's training at Kerridge that really drives me.
Grace, same?
Yeah, I think it's pretty similar. Like I think we're always taught not to have our like outcome goals as the main thing, but I think would all be lying if like my main goal wasn't to win gold at the Olympics. Like I think that's what elite sports people want to do. They want to be the best at what they do. So I think that's always going to be my main goal, but then I know that if the rest of my life doesn't sort of align with that, then I'm not going to get there. Like if I don't enjoy what I'm doing, and as Kelsey said, if we don't have a good group of girls around us, the chances that I'm going to win gold at the Olympics are going to decrease significantly.
Okay, let's move on. I'm quite curious, and obviously, at sports people at the top level, you train 7 days, 30 days a month, 12 months a year. How do you translate what you do in training to actual race performance? Because it's quite different, I'm sure, the pressure in training versus actual competition. How do you compete when you compete? How do you make sure that you perform at the level that you're training at?
It is quite different. I think we do try and put ourselves under all sort of types of pressure throughout training, but then it is different in the back of your mind. You know that if you fail in training, it's going to be all right. You'll get another opportunity tomorrow or the next week. Whereas when we get to like a World Champs event, it's got to be this race, no matter how you're feeling, this is when you're doing it. So like the pressure is different, but I think that's when the work you do off the water is really important as well. Like we do a lot of we have sports psychologists and a really good support team around us that helps us sort of learn how to cope with the pressure, and everyone will be different. But yeah, I think it's that mix of sort of teaching yourself on the water how to cope with it and then doing the work off it to know that when you get to the time, that's the day you have to perform.
Yeah, and almost the training's harder. Like the racing's the fun part. So a lot of the time we get to the pinnacle event and we're excited, and like nerves are good. So even though I'm nervous, I'm pretty excited.
In your rowing career, I'm sure there must have been a bit of a roller coaster. Can you talk to us about some of your lowest points in your sports career, and how did you overcome those challenging, tough moments?
You definitely have like low points. My lowest point was probably, so in 2012, I had won the under 23 women's pair. And so I was tracking what I thought was quite well into the elite team. And then, so I made the elite women's 8 in 2013 and we didn't perform that well. The following year, they dropped our women's 8 program because we didn't perform. And so I actually became a reserve. And so I was pretty shattered, like pretty gutted, because I thought that I was making my way back up, but I just knuckled down, kept training. And then, so that was in 2014. And then I actually ended up getting selected along with Grace in a 4. So it was my lowest year, but then I ended up, because I trained really hard over that break, they saw that and they thought, okay, let's put these girls together in a women's 4. And then I went and raced over in Amsterdam and we ended up winning. So it was a really bad year, but then it turned out to be one of my better years. But it taught me a lot. If I hadn't have had that setback, I don't think our women's sweep program would be where it is today.
So Kelsey, when you were at the lowest point, what got you to continue to work harder? You could have just given up and said,
Yeah, I did have my peer partner, so Kayla, who I had done 23s with. We were training together because we were selected as a reserve women's pair. And we had some clear goals that we wanted to prove how good we actually were. So we got on with the training. We had, I think, 3 different coaches that year because each few months the coach we were training with would go overseas with their crew. So yeah, it just took some coaches taking a chance on us and messaging people that were overseas that these girls are training really hard. And yeah, we just really wanted it. So it was quite, easy for us. So
it comes back to, I think you talked about the role of the coach in really appreciating the talent that he or she is working with, and how does he or she keep you guys motivated to a large extent?
Like they can motivate you, but I feel like it ultimately has to come from yourself. Like your coach can constantly tell you how well you're doing and like try to motivate you, but you have to actually want to do it.
Grace, what was the lowest point in your rowing career?
Yeah, I think like rowing so up and down, like I feel like I've had many low points. But like I guess for me, Rio was sort of a low point. Like we'd been the year before the Rio Olympics, like I was in the pair and the 8 and we got a silver medal in both at World Champs. And then the summer training didn't kind of really go my way, and then I got dropped from the pair, but I was still in the 8, and then we went to Rio and then came 4th, and sort of at the Olympics, if you're not getting a medal, it didn't really matter. So it really felt like, 4th, we were probably only I think we were less than a second off our bronze medal.
Wow, that must have hurt.
Yeah, it was pretty tough, but 4th's a hard position to be in. But I think as Kelsey said, that was really tough, but I think it's made my next 4 years more successful. And I never really doubted whether I wanted to keep going or not, because I think in the end, like my love of rowing sort of always wins out, and I do love the training and all of that, but it's pretty tough at the Olympics when you don't get the result you want, and then there are some people that are so happy with the result, and it's a team environment, so you want to be really happy for those, but then you're really sad yourself. So it's a tough environment to be in.
I can imagine. I mean, you talked about the pair and the 8, and I'm quite interested, you know, as a pair, I think you obviously would know if your partner is pulling her weight. But when you're rowing in a team of 8, where's the trust and the fact that, you know, everyone needs to really pull their own weight? How does that happen?
Yeah, it's really hard. As you say, like in a pair, you're very open to, you can tell how it's going. Like we're responsible for one side each, and if you're not doing your job, we won't go straight. But yeah, in an 8, it's a lot different because it's really hard to see your own personal effect on the boat. But I think it sort of comes down to like everyone's daily training, and I think that's what our 8 this past year has done really well. Like we train so hard every day that when we lined up at World Champs, I think everyone thought that everyone is in their right seats and you'd want no one else in the boat. So like I think, yeah, for an 8, because you can't really tell what's happening on the water individually, it just comes down to everyone sort of committing to every session and doing all the little things, and we just would probably never doubt that no one isn't
it's just
pulling their weight.
Back to that trust again, like what we had built, we all had such trust. Like I couldn't care less what the girl behind me was doing, because I knew I didn't have to worry about her. I just had to worry about myself and what I can do to make this boat go fast, and that's what we kind of tried to drive. You can only do your seat, like you can't do the girl's seat in front of you or the girl's seat behind you. So yeah, you just have to focus on yourself, and if your culture and your trust in your group is good, then you shouldn't have to worry about them.
How long did it take for you guys to really bond together as a team? It wouldn't have been easy, would it?
Yeah, it's definitely not an easy thing, and I think we're all so different, like personality wise, that like when the pressure comes on, everyone behaves in different ways. But I think it was all that sort of work we'd done off the water around like our vision and our values and our goals that meant that we all knew we were working towards the same goal and we all wanted the same thing. So even if people go about it different ways, that we're all very accepting of that. But yeah, I'd say it was years in the making. Like
and it's like accepting like different personalities in the boat. Like we've got 8 girls and 1 guy in our boat, and everyone has different strengths and weaknesses that you can use, and all of our personalities were very different, but for some reason that worked. Like you wouldn't want 8 loud girls, or you wouldn't want 8 quiet girls. So you have like a little bit of everything in the boat, and it just works perfectly.
Look, I mean, I love the analogy because I could also look at the similarities in a corporate setting in terms of different personalities in the leadership team coming together, but yet, as you say, appreciating and accepting differences. It's really interesting. I have one more question for you, and I'd love to bring Vicki into the conversation. You know, you've been doing this, 13 years now, both of you?
Yeah, quite a long time.
I was counting when I look back at your profile. What sacrifices have you had to make in your last 13 years to really focus on what you love so much?
Well, like we've both had to move away from our families and home. Like my partner, I think he's watching this webinar. He lives in Auckland, and so I live in Cambridge, and so we've lived apart for 8 years, and that's just sacrifices that we've both had to make. Like if I want to grow from New Zealand, I have to be based in Cambridge. So yeah, you make quite a lot of sacrifices.
Yeah, and I think especially like as you're growing up, like I think I moved to Cambridge to be in the rowing team when I was about 18, 19. And it's not a job where you can fly back home to Christchurch all the time. Like you've got to be here training. So you go through the stage of missing all your friends' 21st and family events and all that sort of stuff. And like we know to reach our goals, there's one place in New Zealand, like Rowing New Zealand's the only organisation you can do that for. It's not like a normal job where you could be like, oh, maybe I'll move back to Christchurch and work for a company down there. But like all the sacrifices are definitely worth it. But I think it is just that you've got to be fully here, committed. There's no other options really.
Yeah, and you kind of have to do that. You have to fully commit to being here. You can't just think, oh, I want to be back there. You have to just commit fully everything to this one goal.
But it kind of circles back to what you said at the beginning about clarity of vision, goals, and so no second thoughts about giving up all the stuff that you just talked about.
Nope.
Until we get the Olympic gold.
Yeah. Pretty much.
Well, thank you for now. I'd love to bring Vikki into the conversation. Vikki, hi, it's great to see you. Hi, I know we're in different parts of the country, but it's great to see you on camera.
And great to be here. And Grace and Kelsey, thank you so much. I am enthralled by what you do, how you do it, and the commitment that you have to your sport. One of the questions I'd like to ask you, if I may, is you talked about creating that unique and very special culture, and that when you were in the 8 at the World Champs, you didn't have to concentrate on what the girl behind you was doing or in front of you. It was down to you. But one of the things I would like to ask is, in getting that lineup for the 8, were the coaches really interested in listening to you now and saying, oh, I think girl A could be in seat 7 and we could do some moving around here? Were the coaches open to your input?
Yeah, we're really lucky. Like, we've got a really good relationship with our coach, and it's definitely one where we listen to each other and take both sets of opinions on board. And I think by us having a bit of accountability as well, it sort of, you know, puts some like pressure on us to be like, if we think this is going to work, you have to make it work as well. So I like it in that sense that, you know, we can take some responsibility as well. And I think as an 8, we've all been around for long enough that we know, like, we're actually in the boat, and when it comes to World Champs, we're the ones that have to go out there and actually do the racing. So we need to be confident and accepting of all the choices made. So yeah, we do have quite a bit of say. We're never just sat down and told this is how it is, because we have been in the past, and I think relationships like that don't really work.
Definitely doesn't work.
Yeah.
Gary's definitely, like, he does drill that into us a lot. He says, I'm not going to be there on the start line. It's just you girls. So I can tell you as much as I can, but you need to have input. And one of our like values that we have is that we want to be able to openly talk. So if you have something to say, you can say it. So if you aren't happy with the seat you're in or like the training program, you just say it. And he's always willing to make changes.
Did you work together as a squad to form your values, or did you work together as individual crews to create your values?
We worked together as a whole women's sweep squad, so everyone that was in the running to be in the women's 8. So there was probably about 14 of us, and we knew not everyone was going to make the boat, but everyone brought into it just as much as the other person, because like we know how important the reserves are, and having a strong foundation regardless of whether you're actually going to be racing. So we all sat in a room, and literally every person had their say, and it took a while, and it took a few sessions. But yeah, I think it's really important to have the buy-in, because you can't have someone sitting there being like, actually, that's not my vision, that's not my value, because that's when the little cracks start to show.
Because you've talked about the cracks showing up at Rio, and then that Rio was a good platform to go forward from. But what are your values? What is the vision and the values that you landed on? And what do you think we in the business world could learn from that?
So, well, our vision was creating history. And so as a women's 8, we wanted to do things like we were the first women's 8 to make an A final. first women's 8 to race at the Olympics, and then we just became the first women's 8 to win a world championships. So like, but yeah, we were trying to create history along the way, because ultimately your goal is win Olympic gold. But we have like, yeah, little values that we all need to stick by in order to get that goal. That's what I think people miss. Like, you don't realize that you have to get that goal, there needs to be little things that you're doing in order to get that. And so what was some of our...
And I think it's all very relatable stuff to every organisation as well. Like, some of it is just like self-responsibility. Yeah. Like, you've got to take responsibility for your own behaviour. You're the only one that can turn up on the day, do the work, put the effort in.
We had living in the arena, which is like, so this is our arena, like this training complex that we're in, and just loving it and wanting to be there. So was another one we had.
And I think a big one for us is like respect, and that's just filtering right through the boat. Like, we don't want a hierarchy. You don't want someone to feel like they're at the bottom and they can't have a say. And I think that is something that we've gotten better and better at, and everyone feels like they have an opinion and a really solid place in the team.
We like to encourage, like, if there's someone who's new in your boat, we like to encourage that person to probably speak up first when we have our debriefs, just to see what they say, because they probably have something really good to say, they're just too scared to say it. So we really like to,
Great. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Vicki, I love to hear your insights, because you know, in your 30 over years career, primarily in the search area, working with senior leaders, what did Grace and Kelsey speak about that really resonated with you in the last 30 minutes?
Well, I mean, there's many things. I just think the way that they keep turning up day after day, when you talk about low points and high points, we as leaders and many of the people that we meet in industry have high and low points. And it's the way that you have developed that built-in resilience, and yet you're humble along with it. So I think if I go back to COVID and I look at the impact of lockdown on our leaders in our network, how they kept themselves motivated, both mentally and physically. And many of the people I've spoken to since then, they took to sport of some form, be it whether it was walking, whether it was doing an erg. There was lots of erg challenges going on around the place. Whatever was their thing, they took to it to give them some real mental stability. I think it was also the ability to reimagine a business beyond the crisis. I think there's been too many people that have just looked at the short term and they haven't looked out longer. So they've responded to the impact of COVID, and I think that's been whilst they've had to, they haven't looked longer, and maybe they've also missed connecting with their staff. And so I think it's building real trust in your teams. And before we came on to this call, we were talking about that, you know, I'm probably at the age and stage in my career, I'm a bit old school, and you had to turn up at 9 and you couldn't leave until you're the last person to leave. And it's how you engender that real trust. And I think when you take that from the way that the Women's 8 and pair that we've been talking about today, and the wider squad, it's how you've engendered trust, how you've held each other to account, but it's building that culture of trust. And I think that's really pertinent for leaders and also for people's peers, subordinates, whatever you like, people in the team. And if I could just give a couple of examples of that with names, and I hope that people don't mind me mentioning their names. Peter Reedy, who heads up Fletcher Construction now, used to be the CEO of Kiwi Rail, I think is an amazing leader, and he's shown such resilience and tenacity over time. But one of the things he talked about during lockdown was he didn't really know when to leave his desk, and he was working 16-hour days, keeping in contact with his team, being out in the business as much as he could through technology, but he didn't know when to switch off. And I think about Andrea Scowen, who is the Chief Customer Experience Officer at Mitre 10. Her CEO was based in Australia during lockdown, and one minute that business was not an essential service, and the next minute it was, and they had to have all these different iterations of the business. And that's a cooperative, it's a membership-based business, and it was how to lead people through this incredibly tough time. And I think it came back to what you girls have talked about. It was the vision for the business, it was your core values, it was pulling on people's strengths, and it was also bringing people along when they needed a help, but buoying them up a bit like a washing line and post, and then being there for each other and being accepting of people that at times people will need help.
Thank you. That's fantastic. And I love what you said about leaders needing to reimagine the business. I mean, if we look at what's happening across the ditch in Australia, COVID has come back in a very big way. And I think, you know, for us to be complacent here is probably not the way to go in this country, given what's happening in Australia. And then you talked about leaders having to focus not just on the immediate short term, but also think long term. I'm curious, you know, in your work with senior leaders across the country, what have you seen leaders do when they were at the lowest point? How do they overcome adversity?
I think if I go back to sport and my love of rowing, I think great athletes and really good leaders, I think to your point, Chiwe, everybody knows their true north and they're guided by their true north. But if I think about us as a team, the thing that I thought was amazing for us as a business, and we're 20 strong, is we'd always use technology to deliver our service, but we'd never really use technology to talk to one another. And the people in behind our business, Paul Yan and Gemma Tor and Amelia Long, they really engineered getting us all up and running. And it was that ability to really talk to one another and communicate. And I think, again, it's coming back to your values and your principles and what you fall back on when you are faced in an adverse situation. So for me, it was being able to talk to the team. It was for the team to talk to us, where every voice counted, and no idea was a duff idea. It might be something that we wouldn't take forward, but it could actually spawn some different thinking. I think again, under your tutelage, Chiwe, there are typically 5 ways that leaders deal with adversity, and that's determination and persistence. And I think within Kerridge and Partners, and I've seen it a lot, I think if you look at Greg Foran at Air New Zealand, for example, we were involved in an appointment on his key leadership team. And when we started, it was a $5.8 billion business, and then it rapidly went to a 500 million. He would be targeted for maybe not communicating enough. But I think nowadays, I think what you see is a truly humble man, and he's coming out. I think the ability to admit fault, learn from that fault is amazing. And I don't think anybody would question that Greg has been really in behind trying to do the very best for that business with his team of advisors through, well, technically it doesn't get much worse than that. So I think it's taking responsibility, channeling your energy in the right direction. I think another thing that we learned from our business, and we can also see in other businesses across New Zealand, is when you get negative feedback, take it as a gift. You might not like it, but sure as hell you can learn from it, because there'll be an element of truth in it. Focus on your strengths, but don't overplay your strengths. Listen to what people have got to say to you. And I also think you've got to think, I mean, nobody knew that there was a pandemic coming, but one of the things that you've got to do when you're running a business is you've got to have on your risk register many, many things so that you can set your business up for a fall or a pandemic, and so that it can weather a storm. So you've got to have that resilience built in. And I think that's when you've got to realign and identify new goals, not be focused on the short term, but please look out into the longer term and do that risk damage limitation. What could be the worst that could happen to your business? If that happens, how do you react?
Wonderful. Vicki, I have one last question for you. And I understand from Renisa, there's some questions coming through from the audience as well. We'll bring that in just after this. So Grace and Kelsey talked about having this open culture of feedback, and obviously they operate as a team. But I'd like us to kind of translate that discussion to the corporate sector. And I'm really keen on your take in terms of chief executives or the leader at the top, inviting feedback from his or her team, and how open are they in terms of, people speaking up or challenging what they think is the way forward?
Thank you, Chiwi. One of the first organisations that I came across and that we've been privileged enough to work with that really I saw this in action was with Z Energy. I think many of the audience will know exactly who I mean by talking about Mike Bennett. He is considered to be one of New Zealand's amazing and best leaders. And he really wanted to call out bad behaviour and encouraging people to have a voice at the table. So I think it's about belief in your mission. It's staying focused on your long-term goals, and it's not being distracted by the short term, and it's perseverance. And what Mike used to talk about was he didn't want oxygen thieves or energy vampires. He talked about is while you're in a room together, have your say, create a space that is safe enough that people feel confident in having their say. Because when you go and vent off at the water cooler, that's wasted energy, and it means that you're not all aligned in rowing the boat in the same direction, to pull it back to Kelsey and Grace today. So I think it is creating a safe environment where everybody has a voice, and it's having that mental toughness. If it's if it's going to be a difficult conversation, it's highly likely it's the conversation you need to be having. It's the difficult conversations are not easy, but they are the ones that we should be having.
Wonderful. Thank you, Vicki. And Renisa, let me bring you back into the conversation because I understand questions are coming through.
Indeed. Thank you all. It's been a very thought-provoking discussion. We have had a number of questions and comments come through, and you've sparked food for thought. The first one is for Kelsey and Grace. The question is, thank you for your time today. Rowing is so competitive. You're often having seat races for your spot in a boat. So how do you create team spirit in what might be seen as an individual focus?
Yeah, it's hard. You can't look, the way our group sees it is that there's like, I don't know how many of us, like, just say there's 14 girls going for 8 seats. There is girls that are going to miss out ultimately at the end of the day. But if we didn't have those girls that were driving us and pushing us to make those seats, we wouldn't be going as fast as we are now. So you need to realize maybe you didn't make it, but you've helped these girls who are here to get to where they are, and it might be you next time. But it's harder said than done, like, obviously.
Yeah, I think it was like changing our mindset of would rather miss out on a crew that goes on to be successful than make a crew that's going to be mediocre. So I think the better everybody is, if you're at your best and you miss out, then God, the girl that got in must be good, sort of mindset. But it does take a while, and it is hard because you know the training that everyone's done, and then you get to a situation where it's just you just have to race one other girl to get in. But yeah, I think it's thinking of the big picture and just making yourself the best. But if you don't make it, then hopefully the crew goes on to do well anyway.
I think that's a fantastic, from my perspective, interplay between how the team makes individuals perform better, and on the flip side, how does individuals performing better help the team do even better? So you just speak about the sort of internal competition, right? 14 and 8 makes it. And then conversely, how does that push everyone to work for the team rather than working for themselves? And I think that that's a fantastic, to my mind, an example of how it could play out in a corporate setting. Because what I've seen, and Vicki, you might attest to that, that oftentimes we've seen executives with pretty, what I would call, self-serving objectives. You know, it's me doing well, not the company or not the organization doing well. And if everyone goes on that tangent, then, you know, as an organization or as a team, something's got to give. So Vicki, I'm keen to get your thoughts on this, and to what extent have you seen this being played out?
I think everybody on this call, this webinar, will have seen it. And I think many of us go, you look at some of the boards. For example, if I go specifically, I'm not going to mention any names, but if you go to the board of an organization, you want to make sure that all the chess pieces are in the right place. And if you look at some of our listed entities in this country, you would go, why is this board constructed in this way? Because a board is like an 8. And you've got people who are going to set the tempo, you've got the real drive, you've got the keel, you've got people who are balancing it. And you look at some of our boards and you go, they're completely out of kilter. There's boards with completely lack of industry experience. So, and I think often it is about an individual as opposed to the company performance. So that, I mean, I think we see it all the time, and it's quite easy for us to sit on the outside looking in and going, well, you know, if that was me, I wouldn't do that. And then people pay for expertise and they won't listen to it. And you go, well, you're doomed to fail then, you know, you set yourself up. But if I look at our organization now, and I relate it back to Kelsey and Grace, I think one of the things that stands Kerridge and Partners in great place for the future is that we have built our culture over many years. We've got a team of tenure. And I think, I'm not going to say we're there yet, but we are creating that environment of complete trust that people can give feedback, maybe not directly, but there's a channel they can give it. So, yeah.
I love your analogy about the board being like an 8, where everyone is there for a reason, but oftentimes, as we have seen, they don't pull in the same direction.
No, they're not, Chiwi. And I think if you listen to what Grace was saying, there's nowhere to hide in a pair. There's nowhere to hide in a double. Really, there's nowhere to hide in an 8, because if somebody's off balance, somebody in that 8 should call it out, or the coach will see it. But often on boards, what you got is everybody's a little bit self-satisfied and giving each other a pat on the back. They know themselves too well. You don't have your agitator in there, and they don't look in a mirror.
We should definitely send this webinar to some of our board directors, and maybe invite Grace and Kelsey to make an appearance at some stage in the future. Renisa, back to you. Sorry.
Yeah, I've been reflecting on the conversation and just staying on this question. A lot of HR research recently around KPIs, bonuses, and team dynamics has been drawing on exactly what you've described, Grace and Kelsey, around instead of motivating individuals to have individual targets, you motivate people to deliver team targets, and you congratulate and reward the team for how well the team is performing. And it completely changes the driving behaviors instead of making it, personal. And there's a lot of merit to that philosophy and what you've described, right? Yes, you've got to be accountable, but we're going to make the team go better. We're going to make the boat go faster together, and that's where you get your reward. So that's been quite interesting for a business context as well. The other question is in 2 parts. The first part is for yourselves, Grace and Kelsey, and the second part is for Chiwe and Vicki. So I'll come back to that. The first question is for you, for Grace and Kelsey. How do rowers balance short and long-term goals?
Yeah, I think it is important to balance both, because obviously our main goals are probably long-term, but then it's really hard to motivate yourself day in, day out for something that, like at the moment for us, it's a year away. And you can very easily sort of get a bit into a little bit of a rut, and let a few months pass by, and then because your goal is so far away, sort of not really have used that time well. So I think that's why we've got to have small goals along the way to sort of keep that daily drive and that sort of intensity in our daily actions. Otherwise, it's just, we might sort of come off the boil a bit. So like, and I think having small goals along the way also gives us a bit of confidence. Like we can make sure we're ticking the boxes, and you kind of feel like you're getting small wins as opposed to solely setting our focus on the Olympics. And then that can seem a little bit overwhelming, because when we get there, we're like, oh, that's all we've been focusing on for the past year or 4 years, really. And that can be quite a lot of pressure to put on yourself. So yeah, I think definitely having the small goals along the way sort of makes it a bit more enjoyable and helps you to build your confidence and keep you on track.
We also have this thing, like as Grace says, like we try to celebrate small wins. So like just say this morning we had a really, really good erg session. If that was a really, really good erg session, celebrate that. Or we did really well at a regatta, and we've got to celebrate those wins just in case. So you can't wait for 4 years to have this big win that might not ever come. So celebrate those wins along the way, and then when you get there in the end, like it'll make it big. But that's one thing as New Zealanders we forget to do. We're so humble and modest, and yeah, we should be celebrating those small wins.
Because that was sort of one of our takeouts of Rio as well. Like the year before Rio, we qualified our women's 8, and that's the first time a New Zealand women's 8 had qualified for the Olympics, but we sort of didn't really celebrate it because we're like, oh no, it's actually just the Olympics that matter. So like push that to the side, rather than being like, oh, that was really great, like let's enjoy that for a bit.
And then we were disappointed with 4th, and then everyone's like, girls, you were the first women's 8 at the Olympics, and then we're like, oh yeah.
Thank you. And the follow-up for Chiwe and Vikki is, what are the lessons of balancing short and long-term goals for business?
Vikki, do you want to go first?
Well, I think if you look at the short term too much, then you'll never get to the long-term goals. So one of the things, I mean, we hear strategy, it's coming out our ears, and I think our team holds us to account on this. So I think it is looking at your longer term goals, looking at your aspirations, and seeing how we can get to that. So our short term is very much on a weekly basis. We come together as a team, and we know what we've got to do and execute on a short term basis on a weekly basis. But also the way that we forecast and we look out, you're looking at monthly, quarterly, half yearly, 9 months and a year. But we do celebrate every piece of business that we win. We celebrate. It's not, oh, ho hum, here's another piece of business. I personally get incredibly excited about that. And then with the disciplines across our business, be whether it's search, it's governance or leadership, each of us, we're looking at ways, what do we want to achieve in the longer term? So our goal is transforming the leadership landscape, and it has been for 15 years. But we reset that all the time, looking out. So I think to achieve success, you celebrate the milestones along the way, but you always have that bigger goal that's maybe never achievable, or once you've achieved it, let's set another one that we can go after.
Well, I'll only add a couple of things to that, and I fully agree with what Vikki said. I think in any organization, whether it's commercial, government, or not-for-profit, you need your sort of vision and mission and long-term goals and objectives, right? So the long-term is critically important because that's your true north. That's where you want to end up, although you might not get there. But it's also important to have short-term targets. It's very similar to what Grace and Kelsey spoke about. If you focus entirely on long-term, how do we know we're getting there? If you focus just on short-term, and we've had a lot of discussions around quarterly, annual reporting listed companies are forced to do, and some companies have swung to the extreme of just focusing on the immediate financial reporting stuff that they need to do because they're a listed company, without really knowing what the 3, 4, 5 year game plan is. So they're both just as important. You can't have one without the other. The challenge that we find with most organizations is the balance. And I say that because in working with a lot of boards and executive teams, we've seen leadership teams over pivot to one extreme. So like COVID, everyone, just about a lot of organizations just really hunker down and focus on the next 2-3 months without thinking, and Vicki used the term, reimagining the future of the business post-COVID. And that's not advisable, right? COVID will come out of COVID at some stage, whether it's this year, next year, whatever. So let's not lose sight of what the company is there to do. But yes, let's pivot to short term, but not lose sight of long term. Conversely, we've seen what I might call startup companies that are really focusing on the end game, listing the company, taking the company to market. But for the next 12, 14, 16, 24 months, nothing to show for that. So that's the other extreme where, there's no real short-term targets that they can claim to have achieved some measure of success. In the end, you need a mixture of both.
Thank you, Chiwe. Thank you, Vicki, and also Grace and Kelsey. I'm conscious of time, so I just want to share some themes that have emerged through comments and my own reflections. Before I realized I misarticulated earlier, what I meant to say was the individual was rewarded for how well they contributed to the team, and the team would nominate collectively somebody within the team that has performed really well. And in tandem, that created the culture where it's not all about the individual's performance. Several key lessons you've described linking into business. For me, the book Lean In came to mind around the impact of a leader who advocates for you and works as a sponsor. So those coaches that took time out to message other people internationally and advocate for how hard you both were working, and that resulting to a step up. Also, the importance of having a leader who co-creates and co-drives culture, and the difference that it made that when you had a coach that really brought that leadership style to the fore. Trust and communication piece. I love that you use Snapchat, we use Zoom or Teams or other digital channels to keep in touch, particularly through lockdown, and communicating and checking in with your colleagues. And now that we're out of lockdown, I hope people can take those lessons forward and continue to check in and communicate with their colleagues. And also the trust that people are carrying their weight when they're not physically in the office, but you know that the productivity is spiking and the work is being done. And I think importantly, your phrase, the work done off the water, I think we can all really take away around that's where the magic happens in vision and values, so that when you're really performing, whether it's in a client meeting, a business board context, it's what's happening behind the scenes that empowers you to really deliver, accepting and appreciating differences, needing a negative experience to realize the cracks existed in the first place. I mean, maybe, I hope I can say this, I'm Indian, so I'm an immigrant here, Kiwi now, but golly, there is a real aversion in Kiwi culture to fail fast and be, in the Silicon Valley, failing is celebrated. It's about, being open to those cracks and those failures, because you do learn from them, and it allows for a more agile mentality or a growth mindset. So thank you for a very enriching conversation.
Renisa, before you end, I have one last question. I'm really curious, and this is not related to what we've been speaking about. I'm keen to ask Grace and Kelsey what they plan to do after winning the Olympics next year and when they're done with competitive rowing.
Oh my God, okay. We get offered, as part of our being a high performance athlete, Prime Minister scholarship. So we're able to have, I think it's up to $10,000 a year free study. And so because of that, I've kind of dabbled in quite a few things. I've got a beauty therapy diploma. I'm working on an interior design diploma. And then I'm also considering, after rowing, maybe a teaching degree, because I
Wonderful.
like telling people what to do.
Wonderful. And Grace?
Yeah, I'm the same. I've used my Prime Minister scholarship all throughout my study, all throughout my rowing. And I did my study all extramurally through Massey. So I've never actually really been to uni, but I've done it all. But so I've got my Bachelor of Business Studies majoring in human resource management, and then I've just finished my master's of business studies as well.
Fantastic.
What I want to do after rowing is I'm not too sure, but yeah.
Look, I'll hand back to Renisa, but I just want to thank you and wish you all the best as you go to, hopefully Tokyo happens next year, but it's been lovely talking to you. Renisa, back to you.
Thank you. I'm just conscious of time, so rather than do the usual script, I'll just summarize in 3 key points. Thank you so much. There's a survey link coming your way, and we'd be so grateful if you could fill that out. We'd love to invite you to future webinars, and we'll be announcing the next speaker shortly. And finally, we couldn't do this without the team behind the scenes. Thank you so much, Paul and Amelia. You're always the rocks that bring these webinars to life. And we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, Grace. Thanks, Kelsey. Thank you.
Thank you.